been a little all-embracing when I mentioned the Kurds, but after all, is it not the case that Americans who'd never heard of the Kurds before were suddenly being told that it was in their name that the United States was prepared to take a hitherto unprecedented military departure and establish a hitherto unprecedented presence? So I grant you that was stretching it, but and then that Japan, a society in Asia most in a sense modeled on the American image and most molded by American influence in the post-war period, more than any other, certainly more than Korea, and most in a sense considered to be the American presence in the Asian Pacific, should be defined by the United States as its main rival, its main problem. These surely are more than minor key objections to the incarnation by Fukuyama of the idea in a state, which was Hegel's mistake to begin with, when he thought that the Napoleonic state was the culmination of history, or Max Weber's mistake when he thought Wilhelmine Germany would be the great country that would bear the message, that would become the representative state. This, in other words, is the old illusion in a new way. And my examples may be a bit journalistic, but I mean, I hope if this correction is any use to you.
No, I certainly agree with your criticisms of Fukuyama. I didn't mean to derive that. It's simply that it seems to me that the question arises of what is the solution to some of these problems. And you gave an interesting and constructive example in the case of South Africa, but implicit in the rest of your analysis, or maybe I was wrong to understand it, but it seemed to be that implicit in it was that somehow, or at least a very likely gut reaction to your analysis would be, well, the solution then is to fight American imperialism, and it seems to me that there are choices open to many of these societies which can be made independently of relations with the United States. For instance, you talked about the ability of the United States to cut off the oil exporting ability of Iraq. That, to be sure, is the case, but the Ba'ath regime in Iraq also had a choice to make over the years as one of the most oil-rich countries in the region with greater reserves than Kuwait, in fact. There was a choice to be made between spending the income from oil on building up an enormous military and spending it on social and economic development projects, including in Kurdistan, which might well have prevented the sort of schisms and rifts from arising within that society. Now, there are such decisions about how to spend income where income exists. Certainly Haiti doesn't face that sort of option. And choices about pluralism versus autocracy, which in fact many of these societies are beginning to face.
It's beginning to occur to me we're going to need a chairman if we go on like this. I mean, and I can't really be chairman and reply. I mean, maybe there should be an arbitrator. I didn't mean to cut you off, but can I accept what you said there as a comment? I'm sure others will join me.
My question is, it's very broad, so I'm going to leave it up to your discretion to focus your response. I'm thinking about what you said about the transformation of the peasant into the worker. And I'm thinking particularly about the division of labor, and I'm wondering, how did the evolution of the division of labor contribute to this transformation? Because I think that in the New World Order and in the world order that's existed for the last 200 years or so, the division of labor has tended to produce the superfluous, and that in a better world order, it might be better if it was producing a surplus. And so I'm just wondering what you think the contribution of the division of labor has been to this transformation from peasant to worker.
Well, traditionally, the idea has been that it's a change in the horizon. That though the exploitation of that person in process of transformation may be greater, that's to say he or she may have to work longer hours in more stressful and less healthful conditions for a fraction of what their real input is worth, that nonetheless, by leaving the rhythms of the merely of land and nature and climate, that they will become educated, modernized, outward-looking, and so forth. I mean, I'm sure I'm not telling you anything you don't know. The idea was there was a hidden benefit to this, and also that they would become consumers as well as producers. Right? Therefore, they would enhance and magnify the market that their own countries could offer, and the target consumer population that their own countries could mobilize into the world market. In other words, it was an unexamined good. I mean, this has to be said, I think, for almost all theories of development, until very, very recently. And it was the compliment that all development economics paid to Marxism, which was you leave the idiocy of rural life behind, you leave tribalism, you leave the idea that animals and seasons and other things like that could determine your life, and you go to the bright lights in the big city. And then they wouldn't, on the whole, validate the idea that you then form a proletarian party and run up the flag and so on. But Rostow would have gone at least for the first three of these stages, because at least they made it, because you'd stop them running up the red flag and forming a proletarian party by selling them American television sets. The question was that what if they make their own, and then what if they get to buy their own? So now that's the wall we've hit now, and also, precisely at that point, of course, people have begun to worry, is it, in fact, if we're going to think of the world as one family, one economy, one society, is it possible that everyone can have a car and a fridge? I mean, let's not even dare think about this, especially if we live in countries where that's common, but putting it crudely, would there be any ozone left if everyone lived like we do? Now, who can face those who haven't lived as we have and say, well, we'd love you to have it too, but, we do have this ozone to think about, and not be suspected of just pulling up the ladder after that. Now, this is a point I make against Fukuyama, okay, or have, not tonight, but I have in debate with him and his supporters. In one case personally made that, in fact, when he says ideology is bleeding out of political economy, he's dead wrong. The struggle over scarcity and scarce resources is about to become very intense for this very reason, and quite traditional, and he doesn't in his book have any answer to that. But it's also great reproach to one's own theory, in that I don't know what I think about it either. And it's territory that hasn't yet been charted. But it is territory that will be entered under conditions that are deeply marked by and heavily implicated with all the old class and imperial struggles of the past. And no one will enter it as an equal participant. And anyone who says that they do is making liberalism into a very authoritarian ideology.
What sort of future do you foresee for socialist ideologies in the Third World and in Western Europe as well?
Well, was the question heard by everyone? Was the question answered? No. I was asked to say what future I saw for socialist ideology in the Third World and also in Western Europe. And I suppose one answer to that would sound more tricky than I mean it to sound, which is that in principle a socialist ideology shouldn't be subdivided in its appeal like that. There would be no point in being a socialist if the appeal was different, in other words, in these two spheres. But it would also be, historically at any rate, inaccurate. As it happens, some people have made this point in a negative way, I would make it in a neutral way, though there are pre-Marxist forms of socialist and egalitarian thinking that you can find in peasant societies. Socialism, as we think of it as a modern idea, moves out from Europe on the back of empire and war. And in other words,